like my lifestyle, like you wouldn't get it. Like, I'm dedicated to the grind. I know a lot of people can't relate to that, but me personally, like, the grind is life. Tugs, do not lick my scabs. Tugs. You are just a nuisance. You know that? You know you're a nuisance? You're the #1 nuisance. If you were to get a Olympic medal, Tuxer, it would be in nuisancery. This is my Tearsmith video. If you are unaware of why I'm doing this, I entered every single Goodreads giveaway that they had from March 1st to April 1st. Or was it February? I think it was February to March 1st. And I entered like 1,600 giveaways. And then I got this book. And when I got it in the mail, I was like, that name sounds familiar, and it's because of a YouTube video that I saw. This book has just been adapted into a movie, and the YouTube video was like a commentary YouTuber like reacting to the movie, and I hadn't seen the video, but I saw the title of the video, and I was like, oh, I have that book, okay. So I knew what the gimmick was, where, you know, do not do that. And then after I read it, I was like, oh, okay. Yeah. So I was like, I need to do a video about this. And that's why we're here. A little bit of background. This book was originally published in Italian in 2021. On its Amazon listing, it's referred to as The Next Twilight, which I do think tracks, because it's written as romance, but it's actually like the story of a troubling a deeply troubling relationship. It was a bestseller the year it came out in 2021, and it was referred to as a TikTok phenomenon, or it was a bestseller in Italy. I don't know the stats in the US. I tried to look up and I couldn't really. The author, Erin, has a background in law, and that will become relevant. And it is just, you know, learning that. It's just a little bit troubling. I couldn't find out a lot about the author or about the background of this book. I do know that Erin is her pen name. That is not her actual name. But that's all I could really find. There's a few interviews that I read, but they weren't all that enlightening. So, without further ado, let's get into the review. I do want to give a quick trigger warning for abuse, specifically the abuse of a child, incest, sexual assault, and mentions of death of a child. Let's get into it with that in mind. So the book starts with a prologue, talking about the story, it's like a fairy tale. Like, fairy tales are very important in this book. That the kids at the quote-unquote grave, that's what they call the orphanage in this book. So the kids at the grave, they tell this story, and it's the story of the Tearsmith, the titular Tearsmith, right? Which is a stupid-ass name, but in the original Italian, it's Fabbricante dei Lacrime, which does sound better. It translates like literally into maker of tears, and Fabbricante delle Lacrime does sound better because Italian sounds nicer than English. But it's still a stupid ass name. Like, maker of tears is still dumb. But it's better than Tearsmith, which is honestly kind of the stupidest thing I've ever heard. Like, it's like, what? Huh? Okay, so getting into the story of the Tearsmith. In the world of the Tearsmith, this fairy tale world, no one has emotions. There's no emotions. They can't feel. They're empty. They're described as soulless. But this one person, he's sort of like Shrek, because he lives in a land far, far away. He can make tears. He's the only person in this world who feels emotions, right? He's the only one who can cry. A lonely artisan, pale and hunched, whose eyes were clear like glass and could produce teardrops. So the story goes that people would go to the Tearsmith because they wanted to feel emotions. If they wanted to feel any sort of emotion, doesn't matter if it's like a painful emotion, they wanted to feel something. And so this is where I run into my first issue. This is on the very first page, mind you. Let's do a little thought experiment. Let's say you lived in a world no one had taste. Like, there's no taste buds, you can't taste anything, right? Absolutely no one has tasted any flavor ever in their life. But there's this one guy who's like, I can make food taste salty. So why would you, a person who's never experienced any flavor in your entire life, you're like, I don't know what salt is, because that's just not something that's relevant to me, right? Why would you go to that person and be like, yeah, I want to taste salt? Because you don't know what taste is. It's not a thing. You only live in a flavorless world. And it's not described as this world that's like, they're longing for emotion. It's just like, these people exist and they don't have emotion. And people seek out the Tearsmith and they make them cry. And this is how Doom describes that. She says, excruciating passions, disappointments, and tears, tears, tears. The Tearsmith corrupted a world of purity, tainting it with the deepest and darkest of emotions. Which I think is, again, just adds more stupidity to this, right? So, previously, the world is described as empty and soulless. But now it's a world of purity, right? So I guess emotions are impure. In Doom's description, which, sure, whatever. Who am I to fight with that, right? Like, sure, why not? Emotion makes things suck. But it's more than just like, he's making the world that was pure not pure anymore because now they can cry and feel like the emotions that come with tears. You don't just cry when you're sad, right? Or disappointed or upset or anything like that. Tears, like, importantly, can be a signal of happiness. Tears do not equal pain and turmoil. Like, that's just a stupid description on Doom's part. The story of the Tearsmith ends with, remember, you cannot lie to the Tearsmith, which is so stupid and out of place. I want to tell you that the Tearsmith is just apparently, like, in this world that exists, he's just a guy who can craft tears, right? Like, he's described as an artisan. But all of a sudden you're like, you can't lie to him because I guess he's a mythical creature now. Which doesn't make sense, still. Right? And it's stupid because it comes out of nowhere. Like, she's not even saying, like, people were trying to lie to him about the emotions that they were feeling. It just is the last line, and it's so dumb. Because if you were just talking about how they're feeling these new emotions, right? Like, they're feeling disappointment and heartbreak and things like this. Where did that line come from? Where did it? You can't lie to him. He's just like, you can't lie to him. Like, you can't. Because he's the Tearsmith. You can't lie to him. It goes on from there. And it's like, and Nika, who she's our main character, she says, this story wasn't just a story to me. It was real, which, again, okay, stupid. Like, fairy tales being real is a big, important thing in this book. Doom says one of her inspirations when writing this book was fairy tales and, like, dark fairy tales and, folk songs and things like that. So, fairy tales are a big, important part of this book. So, our main character, Nika, and she's called that because her parents were, like, etymologists, and they named her Nika, which is a type of butterfly or a type of moth, but I'm not quite sure. So, Nika, dumb name, but it's better than the other one in this book. She's being adopted, so she's almost 18, stinky orphan girl, dead parents girl, lives in the grave, the orphanage, and now stick with me here, this orphanage is in the state of Alabama, the United States state of Alabama. And it's so funny because when I learned that this book was set in Alabama, I was like, why? That makes no sense. But it's set in Alabama, the United States, southern state of Alabama. And she's being adopted. So she's almost 18, she's 17, turning 18 in the summer upcoming summer, I do believe. And she's so excited. Like, all she's ever wanted in her entire life after her parents passed away was a family. Like, this is everything she's ever wanted. So she's super excited. But bad news. Too bad, so sad for her. Her number one enemy, Rigel. That is his legal given name. Yep. His name is Rigel. So you thought Nika was a bad name, but no. Rigel's worse. Okay. Moving forward. Rigel's also being adopted by this same family. And it wasn't planned, but the Milligans, the family who are adopting them, like, they were only planning on adopting one child. And, but Rigel starts playing the piano, and the Milligans are like, oh my gosh, that orphan, I need that orphan too. Nick is, like, extremely upset about this decision because, as I stated previously, Rigel is her number one tormentor. Like, he bullied this girl to the max. She's trying to see the best of things because she loves the Milligans, especially Mrs. Milligan. She's like, this is the best family ever. I am so lucky to be adopted into this family at 17 years old, no less. Like, they're adopting a 17-year-old. That's pretty spectacular. So she's very, very excited. And she's trying to see the best of things, even with Rigel being adopted with her. It's the only good part, like the relationship between the Milligans, especially Anna, who is Mrs. Milligan. The only good part of this book is this family bond between Nika and the Milligans, right? It stays good for about 250 pages, and then it becomes what it becomes. So chapter 2 begins with a explanation of the grave, which is actually called Sunny Creek. Yes, it's actually called Sunny Creek Home. And it also describes Rigel as he was as a child. Rigel is like the golden boy of the grave. Mrs. Stoker, who was the matron of the home for like 12 years, I want to say, she absolutely adored Rigel. Like, that was her son. Like, she was like, no, you can't adopt him because he literally belongs to me. She's obsessed with him, and she gives him all the love and attention. While the rest of the kids are all, she's like, ew, stinky little loser orphans, ew, gross. It's not funny because it's actually like extremely fucked up, and I'll get more into that once we actually get more revealed in the book. But Nika describes Rigel's behavior towards her, and he like torments her from the moment that he meets her. He's like, I'm gonna harass that girl, and he brutalizes another kid at the orphanage for no like apparent reason. I mean, and he seemingly derives joy from it. So in conclusion, Rigel is a freak, and I hate him. Rigel and Nika, as they are being adopted, like, they're not fully adopted yet, but they're going through the process of being adopted, and they're enrolled in the local school. Nika meets a few people. Specifically, she meets Billy. Billy is Sunshine's sweet girl who has no personality, and she's abandoned by her parents, basically. Then she meets Mickey, who's grumpy, loner, goth girl, and she's super, super mega rich. And then there's one boy that she meets on her first day of school or his last name is Phelps. He goes by Phelps. He's an irrelevant character, basically. But he is like, oh, hey, new girl, you're cute. Hey, cute. And Nika's like, oh, he's nice. And then Rigel and Phelps get into a fight. Or more like, Rigel attacks him. Yes. Figure out why on your own. Like, he's like, why would you attack me? And then it's not that difficult to figure out. Rigel is just a ridiculously violent character, and it's explained later on into the book, but it's not a good explanation. Like, the explanation does have some merit, but it's not an excuse for the way he behaves. Like, have you ever heard the saying, explanation, not excuse? So it explains things, but it does not excuse the behavior that he has been showing throughout the book. And so throughout this part, Rigel stresses multiple times to Nika, like, he's like, I'm not your brother. Don't call me your brother. I'm not your brother. And it hurts her because, again, all Nika wants is a family, and he's just being an asshole who makes her feel terrible. Catch on to this part, like, it'll become really important, but a bunch of boring, irrelevant shit happens. That just, like, happens a lot in the book. Boring, irrelevant shit. Just understand that Rigel is being awful to Nika, and she's feeling upset, and she's feeling like she personally did something wrong to make him, like, be rude to her. I want to stress that Nika wants to mend this relationship with Rigel, even though she actually did nothing wrong here. She just wants a family, and she thinks that the issues with Rigel are going to cause problems with her having this family. In the midst of these chapters, we have flashbacks to Nika's time in the orphanage in the grave, and it's heavily implied that Nika was heavily abused by the first matron, Mrs. Stoker, and it is later confirmed in the book, later down the line. She has some serious trauma from this, as, like, you would, and there will be several things that trigger her throughout the novel. I think this is another thing that's done okay. And if it was just a story about a girl being adopted, like a 17-year-old girl being adopted and longing for a family, this would work a whole lot better. But it doesn't, because this book is not about family, found family, or anything like that. This book is about a romance. And I think that makes everything, it tints everything with this really nasty light. So I just want to point that out. An important detail, Billy takes a Polaroid of Nika when they first meet, and Nika's really happy about this because she's only ever really had one friend in her life while she was, you know, like a stinky orphan. So this friendship between Billy and Nika is, I mean, it's poorly written because none of the characters in this book are well-rounded, especially not the side characters. And Nika loses the Polaroid that she got from Billy, and she's really upset. She's like, oh my gosh, the very first thing that I ever got from a friend it's missing now. Like, it's gone. I want you to guess who took it. No surprises there. New character is Lionel. He's a guy who's interested in Nika, and he's also a terrible person because, remember, if every male character is the worst man alive, your abusive male main character will look better in comparison. So Rigel obviously really hates Lionel because he thinks that he owns Nika, and if Rigel has feelings for her, then that's going to come in the way of his ownership of Nika, right? But Lionel and Nika, they're becoming friends, and Leonard, like, clearly has romantic interest in her. Nika's kind of like, she's kind of like a Born Sexy Yesterday character, or, like, kind of, I would say she's a mix of Born Sexy Yesterday and Manic Pixie Dream Girl, because she's, like, told to be this very beautiful girl, but she's like, I'm just so clumsy, and I don't have any agency in this, and I'm just so cute, and I don't understand why anyone would be interested in me, and so she's sort of just there for, number one, male characters to be attracted to her, and for Rigel to sort of have this ownership over. So I feel like that's a lot of interest in, like, female love interests in these books, how they're written, so we'd love to see it. At the school that they go to, there's this thing called Garden Day, and it's where you can send roses to, like, friends or romantic interests, and obviously Nika would get a black rose because it's, like, kind of dark and demented. Importantly, the rose still has thorns on it. And I wonder, like, who could have sent that demented rose to her? After school on Garden Day, Nika goes into Rigel's room. And he's not there when she goes in, but she's looking, or she wants to confront him because she's like, I'm pretty sure he gave me this because he hates me. He's like, he gave me this rose, which is generally a symbol of love. He gave it to me because he hates me, and he wants to kill me. So when she goes into Rigel's room, she gets intoxicated by the smell of Rigel. I'm just getting, like, flashes of, like, the Omegaverse here. I've never read an Omegaverse fic, and I hope to keep it that way. But I have watched enough videos on what it is and watching YouTubers read Omegaverse fiction, so I do understand it well enough. And so, while she's in there, intoxicated by the smell of Rigel, Rigel comes in, and he's like, I told you don't come in here, you stinky orphan. And Nika's like, did you take my Polaroid, and also did you give me this black rose? And Rigel goes, me? He asked, failing to hide a hint of amusement in his voice. His lips curled into a mocking, spiteful smirk. Did I give you a flower? So, it seems like he didn't give it to her, right? He mocks her, and then Nika starts crying, and she trips and falls, because remember, every female love character, like, clearly can't stand up. Like, she's too clumsy and cute. Like, she falls everywhere she goes. Rigel falls on top of her, like, they're on the bed. This is the bed, and Nika falls here, and then Rigel falls on top of her. And it's like, ooh, there's tension here. Nika is attracted to Rigel, like, she thinks she's attractive, she's like, he's sexy, but having a family is more important to her, and also Rigel, like, literally berates and belittles her, so that kind of puts a damper on the attraction level there. Flash forward a little bit, Nika beats up Lionel, which, yay, I'm so glad that our male main character keeps attacking his peers. It makes for, like, a great romantic interest. So he attacks Lionel, and in the next chapter, it switches to Rigel's POV. And I just have to say, terrible writing choice on Doom's part. It's not even, like, the switches between point of view are not consistent. Like, it's just sometimes it'll be like Rigel's point of view, and then all of a sudden in the middle of the chapter switch to Nika's point of view. And Nika's chapters are written in first person, and Rigel's are written in third person, which just makes it like there's just even less consistency there, which is just great. It just adds so much more to this novel. So it goes over the whole story that we've experienced so far, just from Rigel's perspective. And yes, like, obviously he's in love with Nika. That's pretty goddamn obvious. Like, you don't have to be. Well, it was obvious from the very start. Like, I know Doom thought she was doing something by making him seem like he wanted to kill her every 4 seconds, but it was clear that he was in love with her. Because, you know, the old schoolyard thing of, if he is mean to you, he obviously has a crush on you. So, I'm so glad that we're still telling girls that that's the way things are. Every person that he attacked so far in the story, and going forward in the story, he's had good reason to, because they were creepy towards Nika, or they expressed some sort of interest in Nika, and he owns her, remember that. He took out his frustration on Nika, twisting her name into Little Moth, as if he wanted to minimize the effect that she had on him. He wounded her with his barbed words, hoping to cause her just a fraction of the pain that she inflicted on him. And of course, the pain in question is that Nika exists. This is not a joke. Nika exists, and Rigel is in love with her. And he's like, oh my gosh, I'm so in love with her, it hurts. I need to belittle and berate her, so that she feels like shit, just like I feel like shit, because she exists and I'm in love with her. So that's basically, like, literally the reason that he behaves to her like he does. And I'm so glad that this is how we're teaching young girls to understand attraction from men. That if they berate and belittle and demean and mock them, that it means that they're interested in you and that they like you. And that's a really good message to be sending to people. So an important detail that I left out earlier is that Nika thinks that Rigel is the Tearsmith from this fake fairy tale that was made up. Remember that? And it's not like there's any good reason to, other than he makes her cry. Like, he doesn't look like the Tearsmith, or is described in any way like the Tearsmith. He just makes her cry, and she's like, he's the Tearsmith. He's this fake guy. And then Rigel thinks that Nika is the Tearsmith, sort of for the same reason, which is no reason except for she has very pale gray eyes. And so he's like, wow, she's the eyes of the Tearsmith, and she makes me cry because I hate that she exists. So she must be the Tearsmith. And it's stupid, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but Erin Doom had to have a reason to justify why this book is called Labricante de Lacrime. I love saying that. Why it's called the Tearsmith. And so she was like, yeah, and I'm gonna make it because this is like a fairy tale, but it's not actually a fairy tale, and it's a dumb story. Sure, why not? Right before we switch to Rigel's perspective, right after he has attacked Lionel, he comes home dripping wet because it's the rainy season in Alabama. Did you remember that this book is happening in Alabama? Nika confronts him, and she's like, why the fuck did you beat up my friend, and why do you hate me? And then Rigel backs her into a corner, and he kisses her. So, yay, love that. So, the chapter in Rigel's perspective ends in this kiss, and then it flips back to Nika, and she tastes blood on her lip, and it is because Rigel bit her so hard on her lip that it made her bleed. Yay, sexy. That's so sexy. Yeah, I love that. So sexy. This incident happens when these two orphans are left in their will-be adopted parents' home. Like, these two wards of the state are just left alone to fend for themselves. So, that makes a whole lot of sense and definitely complies with lots of laws. The Milligans, who are Anna and Norman, they're at a conference, and Nika goes into the kitchen after she was just sexually assaulted by her would-be adopted brother. She goes into the kitchen to get some water, and he's just, like, slumped out, passed out on the kitchen floor. And so, Nika's like, oh my gosh, what the heck? And he's running a super high fever. And so she freaks out. She was like, oh my gosh, he's, like, 100 million degrees right now. So she carries him up to the stairs to the bedroom, and she takes care of him. And this book has just, like, a lot of hurt comfort vibes to it, and it's just, like, adding more to the fanfiction vibe of it. It's not going to be the last time that Nika will take care of Rigel. He's basically just, like, this useless, stupid, violent character who cannot take care of himself, which is great for a nearly 18-year-old man who can't take care of himself. So Doom basically says that while Micah is in bed with Rigel, post taking care of fever him, because, you know, when you're taking care of someone who's feverish and gross and sweaty, you definitely want to crawl into bed with them. So then it switches over to Rigel's perspective again. I told you, it's so stupid the way that they do that. And Doom implies that Rigel has a, como se dice, sex dream. And it's like, ooh, the tension. Because he doesn't, like, realize that the quote-unquote ghost of a girl who's experiencing in this feverish state is actually Nika. I hate this book. I don't want to 100% fault Doom for all of, like, the terrible writing in this, because it is translated into English and it is very poorly translated. So, boo to the translator of this book. You did a terrible job. Sorry, but it just feels like this book was ran through Google Translate, and I'm not joking. I do think that some of, like, the poetic parts of the book that she was trying to make sound deep and interesting are just cheesy and stupid. Like, okay, this line, she's like, Rigel smelled like a storm. What does a storm smell like? And you tell me, you're the one who made the metaphor. Oh my god, it's so dumb. So after the fever breaks, Rigel does not remember anything from the night before, and Nika's crushed because she's like, oh my god, that was so hot and sexy, what you were doing to me. And so she's just crushed. Like, the only emotions that she can feel are, like slightly happy, just, like, hopefully happy, and, like, down in the dumps, depressed, because everything that she thought was good was bad, actually. So those are the only two emotions that this girl feels. And then blah, 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 some irrelevant shit happens. That's gonna happen a lot. Lionel kisses Nika on the cheek, so their relationship is progressing into more of, like, a romantic area than just friendship. And meanwhile, Nika confronts Rigel about how he was getting freaky on her while he was having a fever. And so he basically rebuts her, and he's like, ew, I was obviously dreaming of some hottie, and you were just in bed with me. I obviously don't want you. Blah, 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 blah. This next scene is actually kind of hilarious. Like, sometimes, like, Erin Doom definitely has some unintentionally hilarious moments in this book. So the Milligans are having some friends over, and Anna is introducing the kids who she's adopting to this family, the Otters. And her friend Dalma, after seeing Nika for the first time, she's like, Mrs. Otter didn't reply. She gazed at me, her mouth slightly open and her face full of confusion. She couldn't believe her eyes. She blinked and looked at Anna. She seemed to be lost for words. How? Like, I just want to know what this lady thinks is happening. Like, did they think that the Milligans gave birth to a 17-year-old girl? Did they think that they kidnapped someone? Like, obviously, let's apply some critical thinking skills here. She's like, I don't understand. Who's this girl? Why is she in your house? She just broke in. She broke in. I don't know who she is. Like, don't be dumb. And, okay, so the Otters have a daughter named Asia. And she has a similar reaction as Dalma to meeting Nika for the first time. She's like, I don't get it. What do you mean? Like, adopt? Is this some sort of, like, magic that you're doing? I don't get it. Why would you do that? And she's also just, like, really, really mean to the kids, seemingly for no reason, and she has, like, a grudge against them, and they have no idea why. Skipping ahead a bit, we do figure out the reason that she has a grudge against them is because the Milligans had a son, Alan, who passed away, and Asia and Alan were a couple, and so she hates the kids, or she doesn't really hate the kids as much as what they stand for. She's like, the Milligans are trying to replace my dead boyfriend. It's basically pointless in the grand scheme of things, but if this book was about having a family and a found family and all that stuff, it would be better. But unfortunately, it is not. So it's just irrelevant. It just adds more pages to this book that should not be this long. After dinner, the Milligans are arguing about, or Dalma and Asia are arguing about the Milligans' option to adopt these two kids, and Nika, she comes up, she hears them, and she's not wanting to seem like she's eavesdropping. She goes into the bathroom, and unfortunately, she doesn't realize that Rigel is in there taking a shower. I don't know how she wouldn't realize that. Showers are kind of loud, but she steps in there. It's like, ooh, the tension. He just got out of the shower, and she's in there too. So after Nika has seen him half naked and they have, like, this steamy moment, Rigel, like, he avoids Nika. He's like, oh, you stupid, stinky orphan girl. And Nika, as usual, she gets mopey about this. She's like, what did I do wrong? So she thinks that she did something wrong rather than her would-be adoptive brother being an ass to her for no reason, like he has been for like the 14 plus years that he's known her. So but she thinks she must have done something wrong. Obviously she did something wrong and she needs to fix it. So a few days later, Rigel's being broody, like always. And Nika walks into the kitchen and he's being angry, talking with Anna. And apparently it's because he got a bad grade on this test, and Anna's like, hey, you should help him study because he did really good in this subject. That's how Doom phrases it. And it makes me giggle because instead of like actually stating what the subject is, like she could have just made it been like, yeah, this is what the subject is that they're studying for. She just says that subject. Okay, yeah, sure, whatever. And here's a line from that conversation. She goes, no, Rigel, hold on. I peered closer and saw his hand stop. No, not like that. I looked closely at his workings. His logic was faultless, but that wasn't how this problem was solved. I was like, just explain what's going on. Also, it's like, his logic's faultless, but it's not how this is solved. If he's solving the problem correctly, doesn't matter how he's solving it. Anyways, Nika mentions vectors, so like it could be a physics class or an advanced math class, but the way she writes it, Doom writes it, is so dumb. Like, as an author, you can, and one might say that you should, specify what you're talking about, so that you don't make your characters and the writing sound stupid. The subject matter, like what they're studying, doesn't actually matter, because this is just like an angsty scene, another angsty scene between Nika and Rigel. But you do understand how it makes the writing in the novel seem that just more unrefined and juvenile. It's like Doom could not even be bothered to mention what the subject was. You can tell that she did not put any effort into this beyond trying to make the romance between Nika and Rigel seem sexy and tense. Blah, 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 blah. More boring stuff happens. At this point, all semblances of story are basically gone. Doom is just trying to advance the romance. There is this little bit of tension because Nika really wants a family, but she also really wants Nigel. Oh, I just called him Nigel because that's a normal name, not Rigel. So she's trying to rectify these two desires, wanting a family and wanting Rigel. Remember Billy and Mickey? I don't blame you if you don't, seeing as the only characters in this story that actually matter are Nika and Rigel, and then they barely matter. And Nika's over at Mickey's house, and they're all studying together, Billy, Mickey, and Nika. And Billy takes a nap, I guess, for whatever reason. It's not explained because this book is very stupid. None of the actions of these characters make any sense. They do not behave in a rational or logical way, but that's how it is. So Billy is taking a nap, and Mickey kisses her while she's sleeping. Yeah, right. Yeah. No. So the only LGBTQ representation in this book is a lesbian who assaults her best friend while she's sleeping. Right. So I need Erin Doom to stay away from every single lesbian. She needs to stay 1 trillion billion miles away from every lesbian on the whole planet. She's not allowed to come near lesbians. Nope. And none of this actually matters, right? Like I've already said, the only thing that Doom cares about in this book is the romance between Rigel and Nika. And so she makes the lesbian character be a predatory lesbian for no reason. Yeah. Isn't that great? The police knock on the Milligans' door, and someone from the grave has reported Mrs. Stoker, the old matron, for all the abuse that she inflicted on these kids for all these years. And then Adeline, who was Nika's only real friend in the grave, is back in the story because of this. So Adeline and Rigel have like a romantic history. And Nika sees the two of them kiss, and she literally comes down with a fever because of that. She's like, oh my gosh, I've fallen ill. At this point, it's almost Rigel's birthday, and Nika buys him a present, and then Lionel breaks the gift, and Nika's like, oh my gosh, why does this always happen to me? Everything I touch breaks. And it's like, no girl. This weirdo is literally just antagonizing you for giving your brother lover a birthday present. And speaking of, here comes the actual funniest moment in this book. So, Nika is in Adeline, remember, he's the dead son. She's in his room, and he was studying to be a lawyer. And Nika's looking through his law books, and she sees a section on adoption. And I'm just gonna read this. In many states, adoption constitutes a binding familial relation. Through the adoption process, the adoptee legally becomes a part of the adopted family. Therefore, they are considered to be a full member of the family for all intents and purposes. Section 13A of Alabama Criminal Code. Any relationship or marriage between family members, whether consanguineous or adoptive, is considered incest under the law. This includes parents and children by blood or through adoption, brothers and sisters by blood or through adoption, half-brothers and half-sisters. Incest is a Class C felony. Class C felonies are punishable by imprisonment. So bear with me here, I'm going to go on a little bit of a detour. In an interview with Nerd Daily, Doom is asked why she decided to set this book in Alabama. She said, Alabama had a particularly fascinating atmosphere, combined with the very strict laws about adoption and family matters that helped me set the story and its unconventional type of relationship. And on that unconventional type of relationship, she said, I am fond of the forbidden love trope, and all of the book deals with this particular kind of relationship. And one last thing, a reminder that Erin Doom is a lawyer. So let's take all these things within the context of this book. I don't know what Alabama's reputation is outside of the United States. I assume most people who are not American don't really think about Alabama all that much. But inside of the states, it has a troubling reputation of being, for lack of a better word, the incest state. In Alabama, it is legal to marry your first cousin. It's also legal to marry your first cousin in 16 other states, but that's neither here nor there. It's just Alabama has this specific reputation for being incestuous. There's a lot that I could say about that. I could get into about that. That's not what this video is about. So I just think it's particularly interesting that Doom chose Alabama specifically with the reputation that it has for this forbidden romance story. Also, I'm going to directly quote myself from when I was writing the annotations. The fact that Doom uses valuable page space to talk about the legality of incest is buck fucking wild. It's clear to me that the taboo of these two almost being siblings is very important to this story. This is the forbidden aspect of the forbidden romance. It is the tension in this story. Nika wants a family, and she also wants Rigel. And I think I need to say this very clearly. Incest is not something that should be romanticized. I don't care if these two characters don't share any real blood between them. We find out that the reason that Rigel allows himself, quote unquote, to be adopted is because he wants to continue to be around Nika. Which is doubly fucked up, because Doom is essentially saying that this boy's weird possessive streak of this girl is enough that he is willing to become her brother, just so he can stay close to her. Do we understand the issues? Actual victims of incest in the United States are 1 in about 7,000, and those are the reported cases. And here's Erin Doom writing a story about two would-be adopted siblings falling in love, and specifically calling attention to the incest laws in this state. It's almost like there's this sick sense of humor that Erin has about it. She's saying, like, it would be so forbidden that these two would be in love that they could go to jail. Like, it's sickening. After Rigel's birthday celebration, there's more tension between Nika and Rigel, right? Like, that's all the book is at this point, from, like, page 200 to 400. It's just tension, sexual tension between these two characters. Rigel licks Nika's lips. He tells her, stay in place, don't move, I'm gonna do whatever I want to you. And he licks her lips, because I guess that's sexy. And then they almost have sex. I remember this is right after the scene where Nika finds the book with the laws on, like the book of law on incest. And so she stops it. She's like, this is wrong, we're almost siblings. I want to bring up another point, that these characters are kids. Like, yes, technically Rigel just turned 18, but literally just. Like, this is on his 18th birthday. And Nika's still 17. And while nothing explicit happens on page until both of them become of age, there's still a lot of heavily implied sexual tension. Obviously, I've mentioned it many times. There's a lot of heavily implied sexual tension and sexual error between these two. Obviously, teens can and will be horny, but having a grown adult woman write these scenes, knowing that these characters are kids, it is disturbing. So a few days after Rigel's birthday, I think it actually might be the next day, Nika goes to a party at Lionel's house, and she stays sober, but Lionel is like super fucked up, and he pulls her into his room and he tries to assault her. Yep. Because what? Every male character has to be the worst man alive so that your abusive mailman character looks better in comparison. Yep. Glad we got that out of the way. I did note that this scene, like the party scene, was some of the best writing in the whole book. And I'm not sure how to interpret the fact that the scene where Nika is nearly sexually assaulted is the best in the book. Rigel pops out of nowhere. Of course he does, because apparently Nika can't be in a room that he is not in. And he actually, like, he really fucks up Lionel in this scene. And, like Doom writes, he stamped again, so hard I heard bones snapping. And this is the romantic lead. Like, we're supposed to interpret him attacking this boy as sexy. So almost 100 pages after the party, something finally happens. Nika and Rigel are having a sexy moment on a bridge that's under construction. Like, ooh, sexy. They're standing over a river. And Lionel sees them. He's like, you, what the fuck, isn't that basically your brother? Which, like, no matter how awful of a character he is, that is the correct response to be having. So Lionel and Rigel fight on this bridge that's under construction. And then Rigel falls into the river. Boo-hoo. Too bad, so sad. So Rigel's in a coma now. And it's here when we learn that Rigel has a rare neurological condition that causes him to have these attacks that make him violent. And so this is the explanation that I was talking about. So that gives him an excuse for all of his terrible actions. Remember that you never have to take any responsibility for your actions. And we also learn that he has asked not to be adopted by the Milligans. So the Milligans are no longer his legal guardians. And we learned that the reason that he did this is because he wants to be able to boink Nika without worrying about going to prison. So, Nika, that's not a name. Nika stays with loser Rigel while he's comatose. It's more her comfort, obviously, because she's like, I have to take care of him while he's coma. No one else is going to be here. So, you know, if that's your thing, don't read this book, it sucks. And then this line just really exemplifies the writing in this book. So this is Nika speaking to Rigel, who's in a coma. She's like, wake up, I whispered until my lips cracked. But he, ... didn't wake up. And that's the kind of writing that's in this book. You know, that tension, that build-up. Wow, it's so, Coma City say, it's really bad. Yeah. So full 60 pages after Rigel falls into the river. Rigel wakes up and we're all like, boo, boo, tomato, tomato, I wish he died in the river. And just know that from this point on, there's about 100 pages left in the book at this point, there's no plot. Nothing happens. Nothing of substance happened after this point. This book could have easily been 200 pages, and it would have made it 10 trillion billion times better. So Rigel is on the recovery track, the two of them graduate, and then there's a 3-year time jump. Nika is in college, and Rigel, I think, is also in college. He has his own apartment. I'm basically not going to cover what happens in these next 100 pages because nothing of note happens. I think there's a sex scene or two. There's a trial for Mrs. Stoker. She goes to jail. Blah, blah, blah. There's also a new male character who is also the worst because, remember, if every male character is the worst compared to your terrible male main character, he looks better. Yep, got it. Boo! Anyways, Rigel proposes to Nika, and I wished I was the one who fell off that bridge. The book ends with an epilogue, and Rigel and Nika have a daughter because, of course they do. What else were you expecting? These two definitely needed to end in a marriage plot with a daughter. Rigel is as weird and possessive over his daughter as he is of his wife, which is great. I'm so glad. And then this book ends with them telling their daughter the story of the Tearsmith, which brings it all back around, and it's just... nobody clapped. So, I don't even know where to begin with this one. I do think it's pretty clear that I don't like this book. I think the reasons why I don't like this book are pretty obvious. I just have one last thing that I want to touch on, and I definitely have mentioned it throughout the video, but I want to emphasize this point very clearly. It's what I'm calling the Edward Cullen effect. So for those of us aware of the Twilight books and cinematic universe, you might be aware that Edward Cullen is a possessive, abusive piece of shit, and his romantic foil is Jacob Black. In the first two Twilight books, Twilight and New Moon, Jacob is written as this dopey, loving character, and in New Moon especially, and this is my favorite book of the four, which I don't really like the Twilight books. I think they're terribly written, akin to this book. Jacob is written to be the literary opposite of Edward, which foil, obviously, if you know what that means. Multiple times, Bella remarks that being with Edward makes her feel cold, and that being with Jacob makes her feel warm and like being in the sun. To be with Edward, Bella literally has to die. That is like the whole plot of the last book. So to rectify the issue that Edward is evil and kills Bella, and that Jacob is her best friend who makes her feel warm and alive, that is literally Stephenie Meyer's own phrasing. In the third book, Jacob sexually assaults Bella. Because Meyer has to make Edward, the man who tries to control Bella's every move, who does not allow her any agency, who is mean and stolid towards the woman who is supposedly the love of his life, look better than his romantic rival. And the only way that she could think to do this was essentially remove Jacob from the good graces of anyone with half a conscience. So you can see the parallels of that story with this story. Rigel is not a good person. He's violent and mean to Nika. He's an ass to everyone else. He's super possessive of her to the point of violence several times over. But comparatively, he's better than every other male character who might have been a romantic interest for Nika. His possessiveness and violence are supposed to be seen as romantic. He loves Nika so much that he would assault and attack anyone who dared even look at her. She's his. This is not something that is unique to this book or the Twilight series. Unfortunately, it's a trope that I see often used in young and new adult romance. I'm not one of those people who's gonna say like, well, if you like this book, then that's your prerogative. Who am I to yuck your yum? Like, I will gladly yuck your yum because this book is harmful. I see a lot of TikToks from mostly women who like these sorts of books and others in the new adult romance. I'm thinking like Colleen Hoover and her cohort. And these women will say things like, just because I like it in my fiction doesn't mean that I like it IRL. And I want to make the point that fiction does not exist in a vacuum. By promoting books with misogynistic at best and abusive at worst male leads, you are promoting to a wider audience of mostly women that the ideals that these books encapsulate are in some way good. Just because you might be able to differentiate from real-world possessive abusive men from your book possessive abusive men does not mean that everybody will. You are creating a space where romanticizing abuse is the norm. If it is sexy in a book, why wouldn't a young girl think it is sexy in real life? Thank you to everyone who made it this far. If you made it this far, you deserve a prize. Please like, comment, subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Please feel free to share. Follow me on Goodreads, follow me on Letterboxd, follow me on Substack, and have a wonderful morning, afternoon, or evening. Ta-ta!